Today on the VBAC podcast, we will be sharing another VBAC birth story. Today we are going to be talking about home birth after C-section. Monica is going to be joining us to share her home VBAC story. Monica is a hippie mama to two little wildlings. Her passions lie in mental health, support, and healing, herbalism, travel adventures, and coffee. Her guilty pleasure is Capri Suns, and she hides a box in her Jeep at all times for emergencies. Not for the kids, but for herself. Come join me and Monica as we talk about everything crunchy mama, home birth, and how spiritual and divine birth truly is. Hey Mama Bear, was your last birth a C-section and you have been dreaming of a vaginal birth ever since? Maybe you are newly pregnant and planning a VBAC, but struggling to get straight answers and support. If you're dreaming of a healing, positive, and peaceful vaginal birth after cesarean, you're in the right place. Welcome to the VBAC podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Zaki, and I am a licensed practical nurse, international board certified lactation consultant, and birth doula. I'm also a mama to 4 little bears and a 3-time VBAC mama. My mission is to help you cultivate confidence for a positive and peaceful VBAC.
This is a disclaimer that any of the information, experiences, opinions, and stories told on this podcast are with the intention of inspiring, educating, and informing parents. This information is not intended to treat or diagnose any medical conditions. If you have questions, you must consult your provider. Jamie Zaki does not accept liability for any decisions that you make after listening to this podcast.
Everybody, we have Monica with us today, and she is going to share her VBAC story. I'm going to go ahead and let Monica introduce herself because nobody can do that better than she can.
Hi, I am Monica. I have been married 8 years to my husband, and we have 2 little guys. My first one was my C-section, and he's 5 years old now. We call him B. And then my newest little guy we just had in August, and that was my home birth after C-section. And
I get chills when you say that, home birth after C-section, because I just it makes me so happy when mamas have HBACs, and I love it. Keep going, sorry.
Yeah, it was such a great experience. I loved it. I actually just had my postpartum appointment recently with my midwife, and my first question was how soon after baby can I have another baby? This was such a great experience. And between our first 2, we had 5 years between them. Yeah. And now I'm just no, I'm ready sooner, definitely. And we'll see what happens.
Of course. Well, I'm excited to hear more about your journey because I feel like that right there just kind of says so much. You waited so long to have another, and now you're ready to go again. And there's so many different things that can play into that. But I just think that in itself, there's a lot of healing that can come with having that home VBAC. And I try not to put too much, I've been there where I did that, but I try not to put too much pressure on the vaginal birth to be what heals your C-section. But there is something about home birth. If you're called to it, there is something about that just changes you.
I absolutely agree. Yeah. I wasn't super convinced after my C-section that I wanted more kids. And that was definitely the trauma talking. Yeah. And I wasn't super convinced that a vaginal birth was what was going to heal that trauma for me.
Yeah.
But now that I've had my experience, I can totally see how that played such a huge role in healing all of that for me, or being a catalyst for healing, at least.
Definitely. So what happened for your first C-section?
Yeah, so it was such a transitionary time in my life for me. My husband was just getting out of the military. He did 3 years, and we basically had to move halfway across the country while I was 36 weeks pregnant.
Yeah.
So I was changing providers, I was changing hospitals, I was changing everything, changing living environments, changing climate. And so we loaded up our U-Haul and drove from New York to Louisiana, and it was the worst experience of my life. Like, I remember just my feet being so swollen and being in so much pain the whole time and having to stop every couple hours to like walk around, and I was just miserable.
Yes, we actually PCS from New Jersey to Texas when my son was 6 weeks old, and they actually came to take our household goods like a week and a half after he was born.
Oh no.
So I completely I can totally relate, because I remember thinking like that was all so close, and I was like, I'm so glad I didn't have to do this pregnant, to be honest, because I feel like that would have been worse.
It was terrible.
So did you have a hard time then finding providers that you trusted? You just like didn't have time for that, or how did that work out?
I feel like I didn't have choices at all at this point. Like, we were moving, and we were actually moving back in with my father-in-law at the time. He has a large house, and he was more than grateful to take us in, since our situation, like, we were super pregnant and we didn't have anywhere to go at that point, you know. So we're so grateful to him for taking us in. And it was a house that I was already comfortable with, so that was nice. But then when I got there, I had to apply for state insurance, and at that point, you know, we lived out in the sticks, and so either way I wanted to go, a hospital was going to be 45 minutes to an hour away. And so I just went with what would have been the easiest option, pretty much. And it wasn't my first choice by any means, but I did feel comfortable with my doctor, my OB, and, you know, and that was good enough. And I was just grateful for that experience, really. But it was a rural hospital that didn't have a NICU, and the doctor was actually pretty new to the to being an OB in general, and it was a male doctor, and I felt comfortable with him. But now that I've had a home birth, I can see where he didn't understand, or he wasn't able to be the best advocate for me as a birthing mother. Because of his lack of experience and because of his lack of femininity, you know, he just didn't have that.
Yeah, no, you probably see the faces I'm making because I'm like so facially expressive, but I totally know what you mean, where it's like you kind of go from this, like in that moment you were totally comfortable because you didn't know what you didn't know, almost, right? Like you didn't know what it could be. And I had a very similar experience with my first pregnancy. I was a nurse, so I thought that whole like out of hospital thing was like kind of like, oh, that's just for hippies. And now I'm like okay, call me a hippie.
Right.
But I didn't understand that either, like how like they might be really good obstetricians. They might not be, but even still, whether they're good obstetricians or not, they are really good at managing birth, and they don't necessarily have that, like, it's just a different philosophy. It's a different model of care that I didn't know there was a difference until I experienced it. And I totally agree with you on that whole like male doctor versus that like feminine energy kind of thing, because I switched providers during my first pregnancy from a practice that was mostly male providers to a midwife OB practice that was all female providers. And even though I did still end up having a C-section, I think there was something to be said for a more feminine energy to that experience.
It definitely almost feels necessary. You need that that sisterhood, you know, because birthing a baby is such a spiritual experience, otherworldly experience, you know, and you need support. It's not just the mother that's doing the work. She needs support too, you know, from sisters or sister midwives or
totally.
You know, but yeah, I even remember asking him, like, why did you choose to become an OB, you know, as a male? Why is that something you chose? And he had this beautiful story about him being in medical school, and he ended up in an elevator with a pregnant mom, and they ended up kind of trapped in there for a long time. And he had to give her care and like helped her birth her baby in this elevator. And he said after that he was hooked. He couldn't choose anything else, you know.
Oh my gosh, that is actually pretty amazing.
It really was. And he's such a cool dude. I really love him. He was younger, you know, real spunky doctor. And that's how he chose to become an OB. And he's like, I just respect women so much after that experience. And he's a father, and he has his own kids and his wife, you know, so he definitely had a perfect experience for him to choose this career, but it still just wasn't, what I needed. And I didn't know that,
Exactly. And that's the thing. I want people to always remember, like, don't feel bad that you don't know until you know,
Mhm.
because I think we take on a lot of guilt. It's like, oh, I should have known better. And it's like, no, you shouldn't have. Why should you have known better? Nobody told you better. Nobody's taught you
Exactly.
better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's why we're doing this, right? So that people do know better.
exactly.
Before we continue with this episode of the VBAC podcast, I wanted to take a quick moment to remind you of all of the VBAC resources available to you at littlebearlactation.com/links. If you click the link in the show notes, it'll take you to my resource page where you can access the free Combating Fear During VBAC course. You can also learn more about the VBAC with Confidence Complete Birth Prep program, and you can learn more about contributing to the VBAC podcast to help support the podcast and keep this information available, free, and coming for all moms planning a VBAC. If you are ready to stop being controlled by fear and start feeling empowered as you prepare for your VBAC, check out the link in the show notes now.
And he is a great father, a great person, a great human, a great surgeon, but he wasn't the birth worker necessarily that I needed at that moment. And we live and we learn, just like you said, and now I was able to make better decisions based on my experiences. So I was 42 weeks and I gained a lot of weight with this pregnancy. I was very uncomfortable in my body at that point. I didn't feel comfortable in my skin, is the only way I can think of it. And I got to 42 weeks. I was doing all of the things, and he, because he was fresh out of medical school, didn't feel comfortable with me going any further than that. I did have enough knowledge that I knew that I did not want to be induced. I did not want artificial Pitocin in my system. I didn't want to deal with that torture and that pain.
Mm-hmm.
So we opted for a scheduled C-section after 42 weeks. And it was first thing in the morning. And I remember asking the hospital staff if they wanted a copy of my birth plan. And they were like, oh, no, we don't need that. And I didn't push it any further than that. And I should have.
Yeah.
And I remember the nurses were just pre-op. The nurses were just not very friendly. Like, they wanted to put my catheter in before I was numbed. And I was like, can we please wait for that? And they had a big hissy fit about it. And they were like, oh, well, they don't like it when we send moms to the OR without having that in. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's 7:30 in the morning. I'm 42 weeks pregnant, and I don't want you sticking a tube up there without me being there. It was not the best experience. And it was, in the deep South, rural deep South. And the nurses had good, sassy Southern attitude. And it was just too much. So they did end up waiting. And I don't even remember anyone commenting about having to do it in the OR room. And my anesthesiologist was the sweetest dude. But I remember gently asking for like a gentle C-section and being very assertive about, hey, please put him right on my chest as soon as he is born, And they were like, well, you might be super sleepy and we're going to give you extra drugs to make you sleepy afterwards. So that might not be a thing, but we'll see how it goes. And they did not.
Their way of placating you, but saying no, right?
Exactly. They did not set him on my chest. I made sure I stayed awake. I was very awake the whole time. I was not sick. I was not shaky. I was doing fine. They definitely could have. But the main reason that they didn't is because my little guy had aspirated his meconium. And so they were, fixing him up and cleaning him out and stuff like that. And he came out 9 pounds, 11 ounces. He was a big, healthy guy, other than, his breathing, his meconium. And so as I was getting sent back to recovery and things like that, he was getting checked out. And it turns out, it was such a whirlwind of an experience from the time I was cut open into the time I was in recovery. Mm-hmm. I remember all of it, but it feels like it was almost, like a marathon between those 2 points. It was just so much happening. I really didn't get a chance to process any of that at that point. I didn't feel, it was almost like I was watching a movie, like
yes!
I wasn't there.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you described it that way, because that's when I look back at my C-section, it was very similar situation to yours. It was a rural hospital, only hospital in a southern town. Like, we had two OB practices. Like I said, one was males and it was all OBs and they were like actually terrible. And then the other one was better, but it was still the South. And that was 8 years ago. And you know, that
Right.
It was what it was. Like, just in general, even in the more progressive parts of the country, you were not having skin to skin contact in the OR often. Like, you were still having to fight for it there. Sometimes it was happening. So they were still very much behind the curve on that. But it was that same kind of, like, I look back on it and I see it happening like a movie.
Yeah.
And I don't see my vaginal births that way for some reason, which
I don't either.
that's really, I'm really intrigued by the fact that you brought that up, but I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, so I'll let you continue.
No, definitely for the vaginal birth, I feel like I got to experience every moment in it and be present in the moment. And I think that was such a big part of healing the trauma for me, because, you know, that's how trauma happens, is you feel separated from the experience. You don't get a chance to process all of those emotions and things like that. So they end up stored, you know, in your memories, in your body as trauma. And it takes a lot of work to get through that at that point, once that's happened.
Totally. So you got into recovery, and did your baby get to come with you, or how long was it till you got to see him?
When they wheeled me out of the OR, they told me that they were going to take the baby separate so they can check him out. And I looked my husband dead in the eyes and I was like, do not leave his side. Like, he does not go out of your eyesight for 1 second. Luckily, I had my mother with me, so she was able to care for me. She came with me and took care of all of my needs, which I'm so grateful for. And my husband, I told him, like, don't leave his side. So I sent my husband with him and we went separate ways at that point. And by the time they reunited us in my recovery room, they told me that they had him in a little box, and they told me that he needed to be transferred to a hospital that was about an hour and 45 minutes away so that he could be admitted into the NICU, because his lungs could potentially have infection because of the meconium and things like that. And he just needed more respiratory support than they could provide in that small rural hospital. And at that point, they were so insistent on it. I didn't get to think about it. I didn't get to hold him. I didn't get to kiss him. I got to see him in the plastic box, and they wheeled him away. And they refused to transfer me with him because I asked about that. They refused because I didn't need a higher level of care. So I had to stay at that hospital. And so we were separated the first 24 hours. So I didn't get to make any choices for him his first 24 to 48 hours of life. So he was given all of the routine hospital things that I had listed in my birth plan that they refused to take, that I did not want him to have. You know, he was given formula, he was given a pacifier, neither of which I wanted him to have.
Like, even if they had to transfer him to a NICU, there should have been plans in place to be able to respect those things. Like, them transferring him does not remove your rights as a mother and your right to make decisions for him. And I'm so sorry to hear that, because it's sadly not uncommon. And I'm just at a loss of words, because it's so unacceptable.
And at that point, I felt so incredibly powerless. You know, there was nothing I could do. I was almost numb just from, you know, from lack of processing at that point.
And
so,
I mean, you just had a major surgery. So
exactly.
even if you had the like empowerment to be like, okay, well, I'm signing myself out of here. Like, you probably couldn't even walk yet. Like,
exactly.
Even if you wanted to get up and walk out, you couldn't. So what do you do?
That was kind of my exact mindset at that point. And I sent my husband off with him. So my husband left, and he had, you know, an overnight bag with him. And we lived already an hour away from the hospital we were at. So he didn't have time to go grab stuff for him. He didn't know how long he would be gone. So he left with my little brother, and they went an hour and 45 minutes further away from our house and followed him. And I told him, you know, don't take your eyes off of him. You know, you are in charge of him at this point. There's nothing I can do. So my mom stayed with me. And like you said, I couldn't walk. I couldn't get up. I still had a catheter in. So I stayed the night in that hospital. And first thing the next morning, I was like, hey, I told the nurse, I said, I have peed. I've gone to the bathroom. I am passing gas. I can walk on my own. I'm signing myself out of here. And she's like, well, you're supposed to stay for another. And I'm like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. So I signed myself out, and the nurse was so upset with me. She was very clear with me and my mom, like she should be doing this. She should not be doing this. And my mom was like, yes, I'm definitely going to take care of her, but we're going to go get this baby, you know?
Yeah.
My daughter wants to be, and that's what we're doing. So my mom drove me an hour and 45 minutes away, and I'm just, hobbling in my little wheelchair and taking my tiny baby steps because that's all I could do at that point. And I remember we stopped at a Walmart along the way to like get my prescriptions and things like that. And we were in that hospital for 5 days, I think, with no clothes, no food. We were pretty much living out of the back of our car because they didn't have a room for us. We didn't have money for a hotel. Like, it was a crazy experience. And they had him in the NICU, and his breathing did improve. And it was a good experience as far as the baby part of it. He was healthy. They took really good care of him, and I'm grateful to them for that. But they weren't helpful with supporting me and my needs post-surgery. They weren't helpful with supporting our breastfeeding journey. They weren't helpful with, so many different things. I try to be grateful that they took good care of my son, and that's about all I can say. And at the end of those days, they had me and my husband do like a 24-hour period where we're doing all the care for him before they would let us sign him out. And
don't you love that? It's like suddenly now there's a test. There's a test because he had issues, or because they thought he had issues or whatever. Like, now there's a test to see if you can have your own baby.
Exactly.
Like
if you can bring him home, you need to do all of his care.
Yeah, and I get they have like liability concerns, and like I do get it. Like, I've been on the other side. Like, I do get it, but at the same time, it's like, the approach is like, oh, we're not going to give you any power, and now we think that you better show us you're good enough. Like, what?
Now we're going to throw you to the wolves, and if you don't impress us, then you don't get to bring your baby home.
Right.
Like, come on, really? Right. So at the end of that 24 hours, an older nurse came to me and brought me this piece of paper that said, if you don't sign this so that your son can have his vaccines, you can't bring your baby home. And she was very rude. And I did not want to give my son vaccines. That was in my birth plan as well, that they disregarded completely. And at that point, I had been in the hospital for a whole week. I had not seen my home. I had not seen my bed. I barely had seen my baby, and I was completely done. I had nothing left in me. I wanted to go home. So I signed it out of fear. And I let them do that to my son, even though I knew I didn't want that for him. But that meant that I could take my baby home, and things began to change from that point on. And I was more in control, and I got to build that bond with my baby. And
isn't it so sad though, that like we're put in those positions where we feel like we have a gun to our head? Like, I mean, like, there's no reason, like, whether or not like anybody is pro-vaccine, against vaccines, like, there is no reason that nurse couldn't have seen your pain and been like, okay, well, just make sure you follow up with your doctor, because you know what? Like, he was a week old at this point. Waiting another week would not have made that big of a difference. Like, we're going home. Like, I promise you, whatever is in that hospital is worse than whatever is in your car on the way home.
Exactly. Yeah. And I had already given him his pediatrician's information. We had already set up a follow-up visit with his pediatrician.
And that should have been enough. That should have been enough. Like, we counseled them on this. They declined it. We talked to their pediatrician about it. Like, we are passing on care. Like, that's all that they are required to do. And that is a big thing, like, in nursing school and everything. One thing that I always like, and I've in the past have always been super like pro-vaccine. Like, my first 2 babies were vaccinated right away kind of thing. And it was something I always questioned, though. I was always like, why is it that we're being taught about autonomy, and then we're getting lessons on how to convince a mother who's skeptical of vaccines? Like, that doesn't add up. No matter how much you care about somebody getting vaccines, it doesn't add up when we're saying, let patients make their own decisions, informed consent, and now let's convince them with scare tactics. Like,
I just
never made sense to me. Like, why don't you just do your job, give the information, chart they declined, and move on in life? Like,
I just remember having so much fear of that little old nurse. Like, I was so uncomfortable. I was nearly in tears as we were leaving at that point. I was so fearful. And like you said, I was a new mom. I am someone who always does my research. I like to be informed. It makes me feel comfortable,
Yeah.
And I wanted to just wait. I wanted to wait until we talked to his pediatrician and asked questions and, do those things. And I really didn't think that was that bad, but to be so fear-stricken by that nurse, but for her to use those words with me, you can't take your baby home unless you sign this. Like, why would you say that to a new mom?
No, it's this power, like it's like it's subconscious, I think, but I think they just thrive off this power. Like, oh, I can control you, and I see how much more powerful I am than you. And they don't know crap about you, but they think they're better than you anyway.
Exactly.
It's a really toxic problem in the medical profession, and that's why I have kind of removed myself from that. And I tell people, like, yeah, I decided that, like, my job is to answer to mothers, not an institution, because I can't provide the kind of care I want to provide if I'm answering to an institution. And it's really sad because we need people who push back against that institution, but we also need people who are just answering to the moms. Like, that's who you answer to. And I hate it for you that you did not have those resources. But I can also look back and see that I see you, and I see, like, your different emotions throughout this conversation. And I can see that, as horrible and painful as that was, like, it shaped you into a stronger woman and a stronger mother. So kind of, you said everything changed from that point on. Like, how did everything change? Now you're starting to feel more autonomous and more empowered.
Everything definitely changed from then on. I began to do my research even harder than I was before. That pivotal moment with that nurse really did shape a lot for me, and I lost even more trust in the medical institution and the way that they do things, just because I felt so powerless with my own care, with my baby's own care, and I didn't want that for my family anymore. I really didn't. So I began to educate myself enough to where I could make my own choices and really stand up for myself and know that I had science-backed evidence anytime someone would come at me or, try and sway me a certain way. I could have an educated conversation with them about why I made my choice and support myself in that way and my family. So the first 8 months after my C-section, I would go numb from the spine down where they did my spinal, and I would just drop to the floor.
No.
Yeah. And I went back to the same OB about it, and he had no answers for me. He couldn't help me. He didn't know why that was a thing. Yeah. And
that's scary.
That was kind of the thing that made me, because sometimes I would be holding my infant, and I would just fall to the ground. And I couldn't do anything about it. And that really made me realize that I did not want a C-section again, ever. So that's when I began doing research. I knew that I didn't want an only child. I knew that I wanted more children, but was so scared from my experience. So I did research and, learned that VBAC births are healthier for moms, statistically. And I began to prep myself and learn all of the things about what that could look like for me and what my options were and things like that. I mean, that was a span of 5 years at that point. We started trying 4 years after that because I knew that 5 years was like the max amount of time I wanted between children. And I was diagnosed with PCOS shortly after my little guy was born. So I knew that it took me about 12 months to get pregnant once we decided to finally start trying. I did a lot of work to balance my hormones. As an herbalist, I was
going to say, talk to me about that, because I know you've got this herbal background. I want to hear all about it, because people think that the only solution to PCOS is hormonal birth control. And I feel like I'm screaming from the rooftops constantly, like, that's making your problems worse.
It totally is.
I'm crazy. Like, I have gotten in arguments with people who are like, well, birth control is important for this. And I'm like, it's making your problems worse and you don't want to hear it. So please tell me, like, just briefly, but yeah.
I began my journey as an herbalist when my little guy was born. That's kind of the start of it. And as I was doing all of this research, I would do research also for things, that we needed when he would get sick, when I would get sick, when my husband would get sick, things like that, and whatever else. And so when I was diagnosed with PCOS, I knew that I didn't want to be put on birth control. I didn't get put on birth control right after my little guy was born, so I had not been on birth control since before he was conceived. I worked with Vitex. Vitex is really great for hormonal balance and things like that. Unfortunately, that herb didn't work for me and my hormones. I would get my blood work drawn to check my hormone levels every 6 months. But, you know, Vitex was my starting point. And I learned a lot through that small journey that I went through with Vitex. And from there, it just kind of snowballed into more knowledge and more, you know, information being learned about hormone balancing and insulin resistance and all these things. And by the time I finally did get pregnant, I felt so incredibly proud of myself for doing this without medication, without you know, going on something for diabetes or, you know, for regulating my blood sugars, no birth control, all those things. And, you know, to be able to say I did it myself, you know, was so important to me. And that was such a healing experience.
Yeah.
Compared to the things I had been through at that point.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I mean, I don't know how religious you are or not, but it is amazing to me that like God gives us these resources, right? Like he's made our bodies, he's given us everything we need, and we're just like over here trying to control it all without taking any of those resources into consideration.
Yeah.
And like this stuff is available, like,
and
there's other options.
It definitely is such a spiritual experience to choose that path instead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sure, you could go Western medicine and just take a pill and hope that it does it, or take another pill to fix the side effects from that one.
And it's not to say that Western medicine doesn't ever have a place, but when you use it as the starting place and the ending place for everything, I mean, look how many people are sitting there like in the system, fighting with their doctors constantly, fix this medication, fix that medication, this isn't working, that isn't working, but they're not looking at the alternatives. Like nobody's consulting this alternative path. And it's like, does it always work? No, probably not, but this isn't always working either. So why aren't we finding a way to put the two together in a way that actually like helps people? Like, revolution idea of actually helping people.
Exactly. So before I had my first little guy, I was heavily medicated. I have a lot of mental health issues, and I was going to therapy about 3 times a week at the max. And I was actually working with my neurologist to get off of my medications. We felt together that I had healed enough that we could start to wean back on certain things and see how I was doing. And I was grateful to have a provider that was willing to do that work with me and support me in that. And so we did that together over the course of about a year. And actually, my birth control was the last thing I was still taking when he suggested I take St. John's wort capsules for some mental health stuff and helping me transition off of one of them. And that was kind of the start of my herbal journey, is working with that neurologist who was like, yeah, there's some other things you can do if you feel like you're ready, if you feel like Western medicine has given you the healing powers and things like that and gotten you to a place where you feel like you can take over again. And so we did St. John's wort, and he didn't inform me, because he was still a Western medicine doctor, that St. John's wort cancels out birth control. And that's how I ended up pregnant with my first son.
I was going to say, I was like, this is like what I know about St. John's wort. I'm like, I feel like this is not like a good combination, but all right. So there we go. Hey, it works out how it's supposed to though, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of the start of it. And from then on, I really was hooked with herbs and things like that. And then I got pregnant again with my second little guy about this time last year, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. And herbs were just such an empowering part of me healing myself enough to be able to get pregnant again. And it was very much divine timing. Like you were saying, I accepted these earthly offerings, from nature, these God-given offerings, and healed my body with them and was able to get pregnant again. The divine timing of it all was super important for me. My most favorite person on the planet passed away last August. Yeah. And it's still really tough,
Yeah.
But so this past August would have been the 1-year anniversary. And my Nana was a really big part of my life. And when she passed away, I knew that the next year was going to be tough. And just a few short months after she passed is when I got pregnant, finally. it's so tough for me because, you know, it is just divine timing.
It's
so
hard, but it's beautiful. And I think that is something that a lot of people struggle to put together, is that something can be the most difficult experience of your life and lead to the absolute most beautiful experience all at once.
So
and that's kind of that surrender that I talk about. If you've ever listened to the podcast or anything, like, that is some of that surrender that I talk about, is like, we're going to be handed these cards and we don't get to choose them. Like, we don't get to choose them. But if we can take a step back and look at what's happening, like, there's so much beauty there, and it can just like shape us in a whole new way. And I'm so excited to hear how that very challenging but beautiful journey of this last year has shaped you.
Yeah, her last few months, she really got to see me. You know, she knew I was trying for another baby and things like that. And she saw me doing the work, and for her to pass. And then just a few months later, we finally got pregnant. It's like, I had so many emotions about it. Like, oh, why now? You know, because I was still in that dark time of processing her passing. But I knew that, you know, that's how it was supposed to be. For him to be born just a few days before the 1-year anniversary of her passing, it was like, I didn't love hearing that I was pregnant when I was, because I just wasn't ready at that point. You know, emotionally, I was still processing so much from her being gone. But with him being born at the time that he was, I understood then. I was like, I'm being given this gift during this time to help me, you know. And it really helped me keep me busy, almost distract me from being so sad about her being gone. And it also just felt like such a blessing from her, you know.
It is. And so just to talk about timing, today is November 1st, which I'm Catholic, and that's All Saints Day, and tomorrow's All Souls Day.
Yeah.
So like the timing, if you, like you said, you got pregnant around this time last year, and now we're talking about it like right now. Like, I've got chills. Like, the timing just to be able to honor her in the way that she has impacted your family is really amazing.
Exactly. And so, you know, that along with the healing herbal journey and feeling empowered, were both really big parts of my healing journey from that traumatic C-section. And then my home birth itself was just a completely another level of healing, of empowerment, of just such an amazing experience. And I'm so grateful for all of it, really. And this whole journey has just been awesome, you know?
Life, it is a journey. I think we all know why you decided to have a home birth and why that was an important decision for you. Were you still living in Louisiana at the time? Had you moved somewhere new?
So when my first little guy was about 2 years old, we moved to Washington, which is where I'm from.
Okay.
So we moved to the Pacific Northwest, and I'm grateful that we did, because I was able to spend the last few years with my Nana that way, and be there for her in her, you know, last few years of life and experience her. And she got to spend a lot more time with my first little guy, and they developed such a great bond. And I ended up picking a midwife to work with once we did find out we were pregnant.
You picked a midwife, and you're in the Pacific Northwest, so you probably have a lot more resources and options available than you would have in Louisiana, because the South is not the best place for midwifery, which makes no logical sense,
right,
whatsoever. Like, again, another rabbit hole we could go down, but like, midwifery should be strong in the South, if you ask me, but it's not. So
I would agree.
You're in the Pacific Northwest, and you have a midwife, and you're pregnant now, and you're going through this journey. You're like, I've decided on a home birth. I'm having this VBAC. What was that experience like? What kind of mindset hurdles did you go through? Did you ever go through like feelings of like, is this a mistake? Am I being reckless? Or having people tell you you're being reckless? Like, how did you kind of overcome all of those extra layers that come with VBAC and home birth?
Yeah, so I am really lucky that I wasn't judged very much at all by anyone in my close circle or anyone who really know about my situation. And it's even bigger than just having a home birth after C-section, because we actually live in a school bus on my aunt's property. So
yeah,
not only was I
was hoping you'd bring that up.
I was having a home birth in my school bus. So I literally birthed my son in a bus with a midwife. And it was an amazing experience, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah,
You have pictures of this?
I do have pictures of my bus. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Uh-huh. My midwife, she gave me a lot of Nana energy. She reminded me of my Nana. She's an older woman, very spunky, and she's been, slinging babies since the 80s. And she also has birthed babies in a bus before. So that was such a big, important piece to me.
Yeah.
And she's also pagan. So, having a provider who not only respected my religious views, but also shared in them, was something I was not used to.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so great to have that experience, and also having someone who reminded me of Nana and gave me that energy,
that is so special. Energy. Yeah, I definitely agree that having providers in the medical system, they're not you connect on a professional level, and that's very sterile. Even really good ones who you get really close with, it's still very sterile.
Mm-hmm.
And with both of my midwives, neither of them that I had worked with in the past, neither of them were Catholic, but they respected they respected that I was, and that was a huge part of my birth. And I don't feel like I would have ever felt the safety and security in a hospital to bring that part of me into my birth the way I did at home, with somebody who just was like, this is your sacred space, and just kind of protected that.
Exactly. Yeah, it was such a great experience, and not really one that I expected to have. So it wasn't something I was looking for, but it was something I was super grateful that I found. And she respected my space, and I had an altar in the bus, a little sacred space. And she added to it. She added into the energy and brought things to put on the altar, and respected my birth space and things like that. And that was so great to experience. It was just super empowering, And so I had my home birth, and I was 41 weeks and 6 days. So close to that 42 week mark. And I did end up going into labor.
You cook them for a long time, girlfriend.
I do. I ended up going into labor naturally, and I felt much better in my body too at this point in pregnancy than I did my last pregnancy. So I was more comfortable in my skin. I was more comfortable because I was in my home environment. I was able to walk around and do whatever I wanted to. And those were super healing for me. And her support was super healing for me. And what I found out during my home birth was that I actually prefer to be pretty hands-off during birth. And I really just did my own thing. She didn't push to me or anything. She didn't expect or put a time limit on how often she needed to check me. I think she literally checked me one time at transition, and that was it. And that's how I wanted it. And she was okay with me birthing that way. And she was supportive of me birthing that way.
It's just trusting your body. And it's not something it's very foreign to us to be allowed to trust ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's sad, but it's very foreign to us to be allowed to trust ourselves. And it's funny that we're talking about this, because I actually made a post on Instagram about that today. We are are you really afraid, or have you just been told you're not allowed to trust yourself? And once you've experienced that, all bets are off.
Exactly. Yeah.
So tell me about how your baby came into this world.
My husband was so supportive during the whole thing. He would remind me, he would refill my water all the time. He would let me hold on to him while I was having contractions. He would get me cold washcloths because it was the middle of August. And that kept me comfortable. And he would remind me that if I was curling my toes, he'd be like, you're holding tension, release your toes and things like that. And he would remind me to release, the muscles in my forehead or wherever. And he just really kept me grounded during the whole experience. And my midwife was working with her student midwife. And before birth, my midwife had asked me if her student midwife could, kind of take the reins on this one, and that person was ready to finally catch a baby. And they had attended a couple of my prenatal appointments and things like that. And I already had a good relationship with them. So I was like, absolutely, I feel comfortable with this person. And I had gone through transition. The student midwife was really kind of taking the reins, and my midwife was just sitting back and experiencing it with us, you know. And my body really took a few contractions to understand what pushing felt like, because I had a C-section before, so it wasn't something I had experienced. And by the time I got the hang of it and my body got the hang of it, it was like 3 good, I call them National Geographic roars, you know, and baby was born. And he was born, it was very quick. And he was born in call, so in his sac.
That's amazing.
Came right onto the student midwife's lap in sac, and then the sac ruptured all over their lap. It was so quick that, you know, my water didn't break, and he was in call and things like that, which supposedly to midwives, I guess, is considered lucky. So my student midwife, who also lives in a bus currently.
Oh, that's awesome.
Got to birth in a bus for their first birth that they caught, and got to catch an in-call baby. So it was just super special for them as well, you know, and oh my gosh, I feel like I have such an otherworldly bond with this person now that they have caught my baby, and they also live in a bus, and they're very much a hippie type person. And, you know, we just really connected, and it was so special for both of us.
That's awesome.
And Bellamy was born. He was born 7 pounds, 10 ounces. And
I'm going to pause you right there.
Yeah.
7 pounds, 10 ounces. And your first was the same gestation, basically at 9 pounds, whatever. So I want everybody who's afraid of having another large baby, like, first of all, you don't have to be afraid of having a large baby, but just because you had a big baby before doesn't mean you will again.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And he came out perfect, you know, and he was very alert and looking all over the place. And he was a happy dude, and, born in the bus, and I sat on my bus couch after I had him and hung out with him on my chest, and it was a great experience. And I just, you know, rode the post-birth high for like the next 3 hours after that. Yeah.
The next like 3 years.
Exactly.
That's amazing. I love every bit of that. And I love that you just felt so supported. Like you just knew, like, this is just your thing. So when you hear other women planning a VBAC, or you hear people's concerns about VBAC, what is the one message that you just want everybody to know about?
I do have a couple of friends who are pregnant now, and they had either had also traumatizing C-sections or traumatizing inductions. And so I'm trying to support them without being so pushy. You know, I don't want to put anything onto them at all, but I just try and support them as much as I can. And I tell them that their body is exactly made for this, divinely made for this, perfectly made for this, and that they can absolutely do it. And that, you know, if they need any support, to reach out and to find friends and things like that, other birthing women to lean onto and to ask questions to, and get this, you know, even generational knowledge from other birthing women, you know.
Yeah, no, 100%. I love that. And especially that community of women, like it's just so important. We're so far like dissociated from that being a reality. And most women, the women you are surrounded with don't necessarily, like, if you are planning a unmedicated home birth, like whatever, even if you are surrounded by women, you might not be surrounded by women who can hold that space for you. And it's kind of it's a mind game to like have somebody realize, like, oh, my own mother is not equipped to support me with this because she was never supported with this. Like,
yeah, it's really
how far back that
all share as women, you know, like you said, for many generations, who knows how far back that goes. And I love that I'm starting to see this change. And women like you and me who are talking about birth, who are claiming our rights again as birth, who are taking back our power and things like that. And I just hope it spreads even further. And I thank you for being a part of it. And
thank you for sharing. Yes, thank you for sharing your story, because it's actually, I mean, everybody's got a story to tell,
right?
But it can be hard to find people who just kind of like have processed it enough to share their story, to share their story and to inspire other women, because it's just, you know, a lot of us hold our birth stories are so personal, and it's like, share it. It's the only way that we can help other women, is just by sharing it. So thank you for coming on here and sharing your story and being vulnerable and sharing those moments that just shaped you, and how you were able to take something so painful and difficult and turn it into something so beautiful. I want women to know that, like, you have the power to do that. Like, this is going to sound, maybe, I hope I verbalize this in a way that people are not upset by what I say, but like, choosing to stay in a state of suffering from trauma, it is a decision.
Absolutely.
It is a decision, and it's hard. And I'm not saying it's not difficult, because I've been there. I've been in that state of suffering. But if you want out of it, you have to choose to get out of it. There is no level of medication that's going to fix it for you. It can be a tool in your journey sometimes, but it is not going to be the answer. Like, you have to make the choice to heal.
And change is hard and scary.
It is.
But the only thing harder and scarier than change is staying in that state of trauma and you know, and reliving that experience when you don't have to, you know?
Yes, 1,000%. And I mean, I'm not even going to say that, like, maybe not all trauma can be healed, but you can learn how to live with it in a healthy way, that it's not controlling you. And I think once you accept that like, maybe you're not ever going to get over it. I'm not going to lie. There's times where I mean, you were tearing up a little bit talking about your C-section today. Like, you've healed from it, but you're still, like, it's still emotional. And nobody is saying that by healing, you take away that emotion and the reality of that experience. You just learn to use it to shape you. You don't stay suffering. Like,
exactly. I agree.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going off on another tangent again.
No, I totally get it.
I probably shouldn't be talking about mental health, because I'm not a mental health professional, but I know, like, that's something you're passionate about. So I love hearing your perspective on that. And I just, we live in a society today where everybody wants to talk about mental health and mental wellness, but I almost feel like it's being done out of a trend, and nobody's actually offering solutions for healing mental health.
And also, it's kind of glamorized, you know what I mean? Like, they show the pretty parts and they show the healing part of it, but they don't show the dark and scary times that you go through. They don't show the chaos, you know, that can happen during those moments of you trying to heal and things like that, you know. And you know, like I said, before my first child, I had a lot of mental health issues that I was healing through with Western medicine. And just because I was able to get off my medications and feel stable enough to not be medicated today doesn't mean that I don't still suffer, you know.
Exactly. You're not still struggle, or it doesn't mean that you don't still struggle sometimes. And I think it's important to recognize that everybody does have struggle, and everybody struggles to a different degree. It's really, at the end of the day, I feel, a question of, do you have the coping mechanisms and the support system and plan to get through those struggles versus...
And people say coping skills and people say support systems, but they don't paint a picture of what that looks like.
Yes,
you know? And since coming off of medication, my husband and we have to have such clear communication about my mental health all the time. He knows what signs to look for my anxiety. He knows what panic attacks look like in me. He knows, you know, some key triggers and things like that he should be like, oh, I should keep an eye on Monica this week. And I'm so grateful to him for attending therapy with me back in the day and knowing how to do that and being my support.
You guys seem so in tune, just the way you described him during your labor. Like, that's not common for dads, and it's amazing. And I want people to know, like, it's not common, but it's totally achievable. Like, you just shared that it is totally achievable. It's totally a reality. So any women listening whose husbands don't think they can support them or whatever, like, you can. Your husband can support you if he chooses to.
It is totally achievable, but we did the work. You know, I said scary things to him. I said, hey, you're not being supportive in this way to me, and I need you to be. And we attended therapy together, and we had the hard discussions, and those are so important. And they get you to a place where you can be supported and you can be in tune and you can, see
Yeah.
those small things in each other.
Yeah. You
And
have
it has
to get
made our
through that.
marriage so much better and our lives so much better to have each other in that way.
I'm sorry. I'm like, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just like, I agree with you so much. I'm so excited. Like, because you're right. And it's like, you have to work through those challenges for it to get to that point where it is support. Right. And I think so many people, like, they come up to that challenge and they get so scared of it that they either just like touch it and back off real quick, or they just like, one partner will be like, okay, let's go at this head on. And the other one's like, no. And they don't ever work through it together. And it's really a detriment to themselves. Like, what are you losing by being vulnerable with your significant other? If you can't be vulnerable with your significant other, who can you be vulnerable with?
To that person who you're supposed to trust and who you're supposed to, be in tune with. And
and it really does.
Partner.
It really does. Like, and it's just to tie this back to birth. It's like, I will say, like, the health of your marriage or relationship or whatever before birth, it's like, however healthy or unhealthy it is, it's all going to be magnified during labor.
Absolutely.
It's all going to be magnified during labor. So it's so important to have that foundation set, because in labor, you don't have the time to work through any of the crap. You just have to like do it together or not.
Yeah,
like,
it's go time once labor.
Exactly. Like, this is
the hard work.
Reality.
Put your head down and get the work done type of thing.
Yeah, it's like, this is actually what you've been training for your entire relationship, and you didn't know it.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, so that was a nice little tangent, and I apologize for just gonna go.
No, I love it.
So are you on social media? Can people follow you if they liked your story, if they want to learn more about herbs and everything? How can they follow you?
So I do have an herbal page, but I don't use it so much, just because the thing that I struggle with is herbs are provided, divinely provided by the universe, by God, by earth. And I work with them and I understand them and I want to get them to the people because that's where they belong. But that means I have to charge money for them. And I really suck at that part. But I am on, I think, Facebook and Instagram as Foxden Herbals.
Foxden Herbals. Like,
yes, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure I heard you right.
Foxden Herbals. So my last name, Fox, and then Den Herbals. And I'm also on all the platforms personally, just as Missy18Moo. And that's, I think, my handle for everything. So yeah.
All right. That's amazing. I'm so excited you shared that with us. And I love that you brought up herbalism, because it's something that I am so interested in personally, but I get really nervous to like talk about it, because I'm like, oh, what if I say the wrong thing? Like, what if I mix these two herbs up? Because I can't like verbalize things. Like, I'm the same with like exercise. Like, I know what exercises to do, but if you ask me what muscle it works, I'm like, that one. Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
So that's how I am with herbs. So I'm not confident to talk about it, but I love that you brought that up. And I might have to have you back another time just to talk more in depth about herbs and pregnancy. And
I'd love it. Yeah. I was going to say, actually, before I forget, my last handle that someone might be interested in is at Here Vigo, Here VIGGO, and that is all about our bus journey.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. I'm going to follow that one, because I'm totally about this bus.
The other thing I wanted to touch on was breastfeeding. I know that you're a lactation consultant, and I know for me, I just recently, after this birth, was diagnosed with insufficient glandular tissue, and that's been such a huge thing for me too.
With the PCOS, that makes
yeah. And I wasn't taught about that after my C-section at all. We had like one quick meeting with a lactation consultant while we were in the hospital, and that was it. And breastfeeding, of course, just didn't work out for us that time around. And I had no idea why until I met with an amazing lactation consultant after this last birth. And she taught me so much, and she held space for me so that I could feel all those emotions of really realizing that I can't breastfeed my own child and things like that. And help us create a breastfeeding journey that is still a thing, I guess. But, not the picture perfect breastfeeding journey that every mom looks for, so thank you for doing work as a lactation consultant. I didn't even know how important that was until very recently.
Yeah, it's so important. And I try and stress for people the importance of meeting with a lactation consultant prenatally and discussing those health issues so that you can have markers for those red flags. Because I can't tell you how many times I've worked with a mom who I'm like, she doesn't understand why she's got low milk supply or something, and we're working through it, and it's like we come down to like, oh, okay, you've got like this thyroid condition or PCOS. And that's not to say people with PCOS can't breastfeed, because it's like 33% can fully breastfeed, 33% will partially breastfeed, and 33% can't breastfeed at all. And so it's like, okay, 66% chance you can breastfeed to some degree with PCOS, right? And I think a lot of that does too come down to how well managed it is and all kinds of things. Like there's so many layers to it. But
Right.
so many women have these red flags, but nobody tells them.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Nobody tells them. And it's not that, I mean, I'm never going to tell somebody like, oh, you probably can't breastfeed because you have these red flags, but I'm going to say, oh, you have these red flags. I want you to look out for these signs because it might be a sign that we need to do XYZ. And there are some herbs that, depending on your situation, you can start taking, but you have to take them, like for them to be effective, you have to take it like between 36 weeks pregnancy and 4 weeks postpartum is kind of the sweet spot for it to make a difference. And most people don't find out until 8-12 weeks postpartum. And then you're like, well, what now?
Yeah.
And,
so
sorry, I know I'm like,
no, I appreciate it so much.
It's something I'm so passionate about, is like prenatal breastfeeding support. Everybody thinks it's a money grab. Insurance doesn't always cover it. Sometimes they do. And it's like, dude, like I do offer prenatal breastfeeding consults for that reason. And it's like, I don't work with insurance, and it's not because I'm trying to like get rich, because I promise you, like that's not working. I will never get rich off lactation consults, but it's because I don't work with insurance because insurance wants to dictate things that I'm not okay with. And I feel like working with insurance, I don't know, it's a double-edged sword. Like I want to work with insurance so that I can work with more families because I know they struggle to afford it. But then it just comes down to this battle of insurance saying they cover this and then they don't. And then it comes back on me. And I just want people to like upfront know what they're getting. Like, this is the support you're getting. And I try and make it as affordable as possible and give you as much of me as I can.
I was blessed enough to be given a scholarship to work with a lactation consultant as, you know, a BIPOC individual. So I had access to grants to support me in that way. And I'm so incredibly grateful for them because I knew nothing about this. After my first baby, I didn't produce breast milk at all. And I thought it was the C-section. And sure, that played a part, but it's more about, you know, my hormones being imbalanced and this insufficient glandular tissue. I just don't have the factories that make the milk, you know? And after my little guy, this recent little guy was born, I had all my eggs in the breastfeeding basket. I was like, this is what we're doing. You know, I'm going to have a home birth, so no one's going to tell me that I can't latch my baby. I'm going to just do this thing. I'm going to put in the work and we're going to breastfeed. Well, that didn't work out. And he lost so much weight. And eventually I was able to get to this lactation consultant who taught me, you know, about it and things like that. And she gave me herbs to work with. She gave me, you know, iron supplements. She gave me so much support. And now we have a breastfeeding journey that, you know, looks different, but works for us. And I produce, you know, maybe between 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce total, you know, per session.
Which is like, that is so packed full of antibodies. It's just still so important. I know so many moms will just like see that and be like, this isn't worth it anymore. And I mean, maybe for some people it's not, but like there is still so much beauty and benefit and such a gift in that volume that it's still meaningful.
Exactly. And so I call it his appetizer. So I breastfeed him on either side first, and then I give him his bottle after that. And it works for us, and it's awesome and beautiful. And
have you been able to do donor milk?
So we did do donor milk for a little while, and I had a couple of moms who were set up to like be recurring donors for us, but they all fell through, and it ended up just being easier to get him on a good formula that we felt comfortable with and for him and stuff like that. But I'm also going to start pumping again this week. Even in those small amounts, you know, I'm going to start adding it up and freezing it in like 2 ounce sections so that when he starts eating food, I can mix the breast milk with it and mash it with it.
Yeah.
And that can still be a part of his life, and
and I don't know if you've done this, and it can be a lot of work for some people, but anybody who's listening who also has this journey, like you can also use the supplemental nursing systems with the formula to still feel like you have that connection and that closeness, because a lot of people feel like they're missing out without having that latch and everything. And it can be more difficult, especially if you don't have the hang of it, but it's so like there are options to simulate that closeness.
Yeah.
It could still build that connection
with that support of that lactation consultant. With her support, we tried the SNS, we tried, all these different things, and she was able to get me flanges that fit me correctly and things like that, and just support me in the best possible way. And now we do have this lovely breastfeeding relationship where, he does latch, every time that he feeds, even though he's only getting, half an ounce or an ounce from me. That's okay. And
I mean, babies will dry nurse, like,
and it's
they will dry nurse. Like, how do I say this without making it sound like I'm shaming people? Because I'm not, but like a pacifier, I've used pacifiers for my kids. I'm not against pacifiers, but pacifiers are meant to replace mom. Like, even if you're not making milk, if you want to let your baby use you as a pacifier, AKA like as his mother, that's totally okay. And you can still soothe your baby and meet that sucking need, even if you're not meeting their nutritional needs. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I wish that was normalized.
Yeah. And I learned that, just recently, and it's so great. And Bellamy he nurses to sleep. And even though he's not getting anything, or, he gets maybe half an ounce and then he's not getting anything, that's totally okay. And it's still so soothing for him and so healing for me too at the same time. And it's been great. So I just brought us on this huge tangent just to say
it's okay
for your work as a lactation consultant too. And,
thank you for bringing that up, because it's so important that moms know. First of all, you can be a home birth hippie mama and still struggle with breastfeeding. I think there's, even within that community, there's misunderstanding about like, there's a lot of trust your body language, which we both agree with, right? But you have to listen to your body. And sometimes your body is telling you something you don't want to hear, and you need to listen to that too. So I think it's not anything anybody needs to feel bad about. It's just learn, just learn about the options. Like, it's okay to have your journey look different than how you envisioned. You just have to work on reframing it. And I love how you have done that. And I love that you brought that up and shared that, because it's something that's not talked about enough. And I have so many emotions and feelings, and I can never put them into words. So I just sit here making faces.
No, I totally get it. I do.
I work with moms who struggle, and they might not be in the place where they want to hear what we're talking about. And it's always sad for me, because I just, I want to have a magic wand to fix everything for everybody, and I can't, and I don't. And it's not even my place. I'm a resource. Like, I can only help you to the extent that you want to be helped. And so often I want to tell moms, like, you can do this. Like, it doesn't have to look the way you want it, but it's like, for so many, it's all or nothing. And I understand, because I have been there, but I also know that if somebody had explained to me, like, no, there's this middle ground where it doesn't have to be all or nothing, I might not have been receptive to it right away, but I think I eventually would have been like, oh, because I'm there now. And I just wish the messaging, it's always hard, because on social media, you can only say so much at a time, and there is so much nuance, and you can't cover all the nuance, but like, it doesn't have to fit in a box. Birth doesn't have to fit in a box. Like, I'm all for VBAC, but you bet your butt, if there's someone listening who's like, I really just had such a traumatic C-section, I want a repeat C-section, but I want it to be better, I fully support that. I don't necessarily think you're going to get what you're looking for, or it's going to be really hard to get that. Like, some women do get that, but there's so much that has to go into like work out for that. And I honestly think you're less likely to have a healing C-section than a healing VBAC, but that's my own bias. I will admit that.
Right.
But I just wish women would understand, like, it's about trusting your body, making the best decisions you can with the information you have available to you. and accepting that something's not going to go the way you want it to, and that doesn't define anything about you.
Exactly.
And once you get those 3 things into place, it doesn't have to fit in any box that you are trying to fit it into.
Like you said, it'll be whatever journey, you know, whatever choices you make that are best for you and your body and your baby. And that's going to look a specific way for you as a mother, because every single mother, every single baby is different, every single journey, and none of them are going to look the same. They're all going to be different in their own little ways. And, you know, not every mom gives their baby a boob appetizer, you know, before their bottle.
Right,
but that's what works for me, and we love it. And it's, you know,
and it's a beautiful option that, I mean, if nobody told you that that's okay, like, would you have ever known, like, oh, that's okay? No, you might have been sitting there like, oh, well, maybe I think about this thing, but that's kind of weird, isn't it? Does that make sense?
Exactly.
And then moms will go to Facebook and ask if this is okay. And I think it's like social media, I think, is so good because you can connect with people. Like, we've connected on social media, but it's also like, is this okay? And then you get so many voices saying such insane things that I feel like it compounds the issue. And I'm like, I don't think people need to live in echo chambers, but like for certain things, like create an echo chamber. It's okay, because sometimes having people who just think similarly to you and support you. So I'm sorry, I'm like going off about.
I love it. I just wanted to make sure I got to talk to you about
I'm so glad you brought that up.
Herbs have been a great healing tool there too. You know, I go through, and moringa and blessed thistle have all been supporting me during this journey, and I'm so grateful for them and their magic and their healing.
And do you use, this is the controversial question, do you use and believe in fenugreek?
You know, I haven't started taking it for me. I know that it's one that you know, is talked about, but I have been having, when I work with herbs, I am very energetic about it, and I very much
you just don't feel connected to that one, right?
Exactly. I almost animize herbs, you know what I mean? Like, go through feels good in my body, and moringa feels good in my body, and so I work with them. And I don't feel like I need more. I don't feel like I need to connect with fenugreek, and that's okay, you know.
And
no, totally. Moms do too, you know.
I love that though, because there's just intuition with certain things. And it can be that simple, and everybody always wants an explanation of, oh, well, why? What's the evidence? And I'm all for evidence, but sometimes you don't need evidence. Sometimes it's like, this just doesn't feel right to me, and that's fine.
Exactly.
And so maybe I think that's where we should wrap up. Otherwise, I have a discussion to talk for another 3 hours. But it was really great talking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It was a blast. And thank you again for sharing your story.